And a very good evening to everyone, and welcome to Politics 101 on a Wednesday evening, wherever you're joining us from, whether you're joining us from Guyana, whether you're joining us from the wider Caribbean, our Caribbean too, or whether you're joining us from further afield, North America. Good evening. Good night to those of you who are joining us from Europe, especially those of you from the United Kingdom. Welcome to Politics 101. It's 7 p.m. and it's the place to be, Monday through Friday. A special good evening to the people of Essequibo. The people of Essequibo, remember, we are still trying to hold off the Venezuelans from encroaching further on our territory. Welcome to all of you and to Politics 101. It's the third day of the teachers' strike, and it seems as though it's gaining momentum. But this evening, we want to continue our discussion that we started last week, looking at what's happening in Gaza with the Palestinians there. Got some feedback from last week's program. Some of you said that you did not know that Guyana was earmarked at one time for a settlement of the Israelis. Well, it could have been Guyana. Yes. They weren't too interested in Guyana. They wanted what they call to go back to their ancestral lands. And so, but Guyana was considered by the British. Good evening to you, William. Good evening, Rashley. Good evening, Rhonda. Welcome to Politics 101. Welcome to Politics 101. It's Wednesday, so it's our midweek edition. The struggle, of course, continues there in the Palestine, in Gaza, and it's having consequences, of course, for what's happening in the United States. The Biden administration and Biden himself finding themselves in much of a tangle on this issue. I've always felt that foreign policy is not a big thing in American politics, foreign policy per se, but it's the consequences of foreign policy. The consequences of foreign policy in this instance. Because, you know, when elections are so close, you cannot afford to lose votes. And the Democrats, stand to lose some votes on this issue of what's happening in Gaza. Welcome to Politics 101. I was on a program that I do. I have to find a way to rebroadcast it. But I was on a program, I think, it must have been Tuesday morning, to talk about the strike in Guyana. It's a radio program coming out of Antigua. And we talked about the strike. But the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda came out on publicly and said that the president of Ukraine is crazy. He's crazy to have gotten himself into this whole thing of wanting to join NATO. That he felt it was a wrong position by the president of Ukraine to want to join NATO, and that he, Mr. Brown, could not have sent his people into war on such an issue. And so it was quite a statement. And you know, my own comment was that he was being honest. It's not a chap that I am fond of, but I think he was saying what a lot of the prime ministers in the Caribbean wanted to say publicly, but wouldn't say publicly. That Ukraine has gotten itself caught up in that tug of war between superpowers, and of course, once uh, uh, Russia decided to invade Ukraine, as small countries we cannot support invasion. So it puts us in the Caribbean in a real funny spot, in a real funny situation. And I think Mr. Gaston Brown shocked a lot of his colleagues when he publicly said that the Ukraine president and the government has gotten us in this mess that they've gotten us into. Of course, no sooner as he said that, Ron Sanders, our countryman, who is the ambassador of Antigua and Barbuda to the United States, I think, and the OAS, he said that Antigua and Barbuda opposes the invasion by the Russians. And as I said, well, when you put the two positions together, they represent Antigua's position, but not always articulated in that way. It's their position, similar to their position in Guyana. I mean, in years gone by, CARICOM would have come out and said clearly, we condemn Venezuela. We condemn Venezuela. They didn't do so. We saw Ralph Gonzalez and Mia Motley and them dancing around and talking about a zone of peace and all that nonsense, Venezuela is wrong, and CARICOM would have taken that position. But as we said at the time, the hustling mentality these days, they don't stand on principle and anything. And as we have seen with this issue of the Palestinians, only Belize has really come out with a clear position. I have no doubt in my mind that most, if not all, of the CARICOM leaders would stand with the Palestinians. But they're all looking over their shoulders and worrying if they stand with the Palestinians, what will happen to them, and so on. It's not an issue that I plan to raise with my panel tonight, but I will take a stab at it with them since we have them here. Same panel as last week. Former President Donald Ramotar, Mr. Gerald Peirera, Organization for the Victory, Pan-Africanist, anti-imperialist. I saw him the other night fighting with the pragmatists, as they call themselves, and so on a program. He held his own. And Professor Clive Thomas, longtime economist, co-leader of the Working People's Alliance here, and my co-host Rohit Kanhai, executive member of the WPA and someone who's been paying keen interest and keen attention to what's happening there in Palestine, in Gaza. Good evening to you all and welcome. Let's get going because we have a big panel and we have lots to talk about. Gentlemen, good evening.
Good evening.
As you heard in my introduction there, I don't know if any of you heard Gaston Brown's statement, or you're hearing it for the first time. Anybody heard it?
No.
Yes.
First time I'm hearing it.
Yes.
But now you've mentioned it, I'll got it.
Yes. I like to get your thoughts on that nuanced position there. Donald, you are the one here that sat in the hottest seat. What's your take on what Gaston Brown is reported to have said?
I think he's just being honest because what is happening in
that's what I said on the program this morning. Yes, go ahead.
What is happening in Ukraine is a proxy war against Russia. NATO has proxy war against Russia, and they seems to want to fight to the last Ukrainian, and to get their position, because people should know that if you go back into 2008, 2007, 2008, when Putin made a speech in Romania, when he said very, very clearly that Ukraine and Georgia going into NATO is unacceptable, that you can't bring your NATO bases and weapons right on my doorsteps. And I need to point out to those of you who are old enough to remember that the Americans were ready to go to war when the Soviet Union had weapons in Cuba, and that was 90 miles away from the shores of the United States. And this is on the border. There's only a line dividing the two countries there. So Russia, of course, had very strong security concerns, legitimate security concerns. The second things too that Russia had, because there's a lot of misrepresentation going on with Donetsk and Ludansk and those places near. Those are Russian-speaking province. But Putin never made any attempt to take them over. Even after the 2014 election, the Maidan coup in 2013, 2014, he didn't attempt to take them over. Instead, he went into agreement with Germany and France and Ukraine, with what it was called the Minsk Agreement, in which they were asking to give those Russian-speaking areas more autonomy, but they will stay within Ukraine. And then we heard subsequently, a couple of months ago, where Merkel, Holland, who was then the president of France, and the former president of Ukraine, all saying that they just used that as a trick to arm Ukraine even more, but they never had any intention of adhering to the agreement that they had. And finally, the other point I would like to make, in March of 2022, when the issue started in Ukraine, the Ukrainian negotiators and the Russian negotiation came to an agreement. In fact, the Ukrainian people signed it. And Boris Johnson flew to Kyiv and told them that the West will back them and they should fight. They shouldn't come to any agreement. So I think Gaston Browne is probably one of the most honest or one of the most informed of the leaders in the region, and took a good position. I would be correct. I mean, an honest position that he took.
Maybe both.
Yeah, it might be both. President Donald Ramotar, they're taking the new ball, Desmond Haynes. Let me bring in Gordon Greenwich now. Professor Thomas, your take on Gaston Browne's.
I share the view that Donald just expressed. I'm convinced that there is a provocation and that they're fighting to the last Ukrainian. I think it's a setup to diminish the capacity of Russia, and it speaks itself.
Professor Clive Thomas, they're crisp, like a square drive off the back foot by Gordon Greenwich when his son sung. You know, Gordon said when he went to England as a boy and he faced racism there, you wonk. And he said, what do I know? What does that mean? And he faced racism. He wanted to go back to Barbados, but his parents, of course, wouldn't allow him. And so he thought his response to the racism was to take it out on 9 ounces and to hit it as hard and as aggressive as possible. That was his way of fighting racism. My brother, Gerald, your thoughts on Gaston Browne's position?
Well, I didn't hear Gaston Browne's statement, but as I said, I will look at it, I'll check it. But my position is, I agree with Mr. Ramotar and Dr. Thomas. I wrote defending Russia's position. I think that Putin had to go in. It was definitely a provocation. I mean, they were moving, their whole idea is to encircle Russia. And Putin was just going to throw back and allow this to happen. I don't think, that Mao Zedong said the best means of defense is attack. So he went in and he did what he had to do. But what is interesting is that, do you know there is a Neo-Nazi International, the same way
Yes,
like how you have the
in
Socialist
Ukraine.
International. So there are two international, but there's a huge Neo-Nazi International, and there is branches all in. There's a branch in Venezuela, and the Venezuelan government came down heavily on them. There is branch in Brazil. There is in Colombia, and so, and even in Mexico, Argentina. They're in Latin America, all across Europe and the United States. But I think recently, not too long ago, somebody, an investigative journalist, found that weaponry that was delivered to Ukraine was finding itself showing up in Mexico in the hands of drug cartels. This was Al Jazeera carried it, and I think it was on RT News. But the whole thing is, we're seeing what they're doing. The idea is to, as you said, it's a proxy war, is to weaken Russia. That is what it's about. And they're also preparing now. They're also preparing now with Taiwan. They want to extend it to do the same with China.
Rohit, quick thoughts on Gaston Brown's position vis-a-vis the war there in Ukraine.
I was listening today to an interview on Professor Jeffrey Sachs, and basically that's his position. He gave a whole historical review of the Ukraine war, and Putin told them clearly, do not sign that expansion of NATO. And he was the Ukrainian president was advised, go ahead and sign it. And they scrapped any previous agreement they had with Russia, and Putin would not accept placing nuclear weapons on the border of Russia. That's basically the same position.
Thank you very much, Rohit. In case you all are just joining us, tonight we're talking foreign policy. Yes, go ahead, Donald.
Just to make a very, just to say that in 1989, when Germany reunited, one of the conditions that allowed Germany to reunite was a promise by NATO to Gorbachev then that NATO will not move 1 inch from Germany.
Correct.
And because Gorbachev expressed his concern about that, and he promised not 1 inch they will move towards the Soviet Union from Germany. And that was in 1989. And Russia withdrew all their forces. All this talk they're talking about Russia wants to expand. Russia withdrew all their forces from Eastern Europe and took them back into the borders of the then Soviet Union, then eventually into Russia itself. So it was a deception and a betrayal of trust, I would say, on the part of the Russian with their relationship with NATO.
President
David, just before, sorry, why I mentioned the thing about, I was talking about the Nazi International is because many of these Nazi groups across Europe and South America have volunteers fighting in the Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you very much, Gerald, for that information. And welcome to those of you who are a little bit late. Vibert White, good evening. Good evening, my brother. Good evening, Rhonda from Den Amstel. Vibert is joining us from Grove. Welcome to Politics 101. Foreign policy tonight. Sometimes we get bogged down with our politics in Guyana for good reason. And we forget that we are part of a larger region, a part of a larger hemisphere.
Sometimes for bad reasons too.
Sometimes with bad reasons, he said.
Sometimes with bad reason. And we forget that we are part of a larger world, and that what happens in the world would have influence and impact on us in Guyana. Gentlemen, since we spoke last week, the big news in that part of the world in the Middle East were the attacks of retaliation, as the United States have put it, for the death of 3 American servicemen, and it set tongues wagging about the possibility of a widening of the war there in the Middle East. Your quick thoughts on them, starting with you, Donald?
Well, since we met since we spoke about this issue last week, the situation has gotten even worse, I would say.
Mhm.
The humanitarian type of situation, the slaughter of the Palestinians continue unabated. Things have gotten much worse. The idea of the American strike in Yemen and Iraq and Syria, it's just on the pretext that they're retaliating for the three soldiers that got killed. I think it's just, in my mind, a smokescreen to cover up their full support for Israel, to allow Israel to do precisely what they want to do, which is clearly genocide. Right now, they're moving towards attacking the Palestinian in Rafah, people living in tents, gathering. Today, I heard a news item where Palestinians were lining up to try to get some relief, some little food that was coming in, and then they were attacked and shot. Down there, an 11-year-old girl was killed going and fetch water by a sniper. So they have to tie rope and know all kind of things to do to try to get a little bit of water to eat. The humanitarian crisis is unbelievable. And there is still, I mean, while at the General Assembly of the United Nations and at the Security Council, they are making some noise, but they're not in the Security Council. They're not coming to any decision because of the veto power of the United States. Um, and Israel continues to do what they know to do the best, and that is to kill people. And it it is it has really reached an abominable state. Blinken is in the region, and once again, every time he goes into the region, it seems to me that the problems gets worse. Um, that and this attack, as I said on the Houthi, who are only trying to stop the killing in Gaza, they are only attacking ships going to Israel and to try to stop them from killing the people in Gaza is really unacceptable. And it really, I think it has ripped the mask from the whole Western world, many of them who talk so much about human rights and concern for people. This is genocide happening. Right now, South Africa is the leading country in the world to save our humanity, all of us. South
Yes.
Africa is taking the leading role to give us, to remind us that we're still people and not animals in the wild. So I would
Donald,
say the
let me
things are
ask.
getting worse.
Yeah, let me
Uh,
ask you this question,
go,
which
go.
your colleagues should figure into their answer. Um, do, do you not think that Biden is making a shift in his stance?
But not in any decisive way because he seems to be overruled by Netanyahu. And because every time the Americans are saying one thing, but then they're doing nothing to enforce the position that they say they want, and they can do it. They have the power in their hands to stop supplying the weapons to the Israeli government, to stop giving them money. They just voted another 14 million or $14 billion more to go into the Israeli forces. They're the ones who are supplying all the equipment to they are part of this whole massacre that is taking place. And what they're saying, they're taking no action in order to bring it about. No action at all they're taking. None. They continue to condemn Hamas and everything else, blame Hamas for everything else that has happened.
CY and
They're
then
blaming people to fight for their freedom.
yeah, CY and then Gerald, try to stitch into your answer whether you think Biden is adjusting his position somewhat.
I thought I heard Biden giving an interview this evening. He was asked why it is he did not attack Iran directly and why he is so confident that the satellite groups that he picked on are truly satellite groups. And he responded by saying Iran gives them the guns and gives them financial aid. The exact thing he's being criticized for doing this with Israel. I can't imagine a more graphic confession of guilt than that. I was amazed. He said with a straight face 5 minutes ago before this program started. That's the interview I was looking at. He's come back from some event and the reporters stopped him and they asked him how he could be so sure those people were acting as proxies. And he says they had the guns from Iran and they were giving them finance. He never reflected on one moment that he confessed the complicity in what is happening in Gaza.
Yeah. Gerald? Sorry, I thought you were finished.
No, I thought it funny and ironic.
Yeah. It's
An abject confession. I've lost all respect for the left groups in the United States. Total loss of respect.
Yeah.
They're mounting the war game. They're playing all sorts of chicken wars. They're playing with other people's lives. Because now a nuclear war coming out of this is the end of all wars. Because the end of all civilization as we know it. And these guys are really behaving remarkable. And I find the stupidity to understand what they're doing alarming. Because these are grown adults. He's the leader of as the leading superpower in the world. And he can make a statement like that without reflecting on it.
Yeah.
The notion of American exceptionalism really
Correct.
blinds them.
Correct.
Gerald, come in.
It's interesting what Professor Thomas said, because, as a member of Slovakia and a member of the parliament, the European Parliament said, he said these Anglo-Saxons don't hear themselves,
No, I know.
And he said they want to destroy the Slavs. He said, but the Slavs are going to bring down Western Europe. That was interesting. I mean, Biden is there saying that, and that is exactly what the Americans are doing to Israel. But I want to, before I move on, Mr. Ramotar pointed out about South Africa reminding us about our humanity. And so, I mean, that is part of the African worldview and African philosophical positions like Ubuntu. And so the concern for all humanity, because Africans know what it is to suffer. Yeah. And when it comes to standing up, I was not surprised that South Africa led the charge. It's an embarrassment to many countries that say that they're Islamic and Muslims, because they should have made the first move in keeping with Islamic principles, but they didn't do it. They're more concerned by their own interests. Having said that, I think to widen it, the attempt, I think the widening of this conflict, it's inevitable. I saw a placard where someone was saying that aid being taken by aid going to the Palestinians, and when it is blocked, those who are blocking it are referred to as citizens, while those who are trying to prevent the ships from going to Israel are being referred to as terrorists. And what the Houthis are doing, the Houthis are standing up, and the Houthis are very powerful. And if it escalates, then the Houthis will not just going to fire at in the ships in the sea passing there. They're going to escalate. They're going to take the war to Saudi Arabia, because quietly Saudi Arabia and Jordan are facilitating, helping the Americans with this. Evidence is coming out in what the Americans are doing with the support for Israel. Saudi Arabia is quietly, along with some other countries in the Gulf state, working behind doors with the Israelis. It's terrible. But the thing is, they believe that by hitting the popular mobilization brigades that are supported by Iran in Syria and Iraq, that will weaken them, so they will become less effective in terms of what they're doing. But what the Americans are doing is opening up the gates for the or opening up, creating a situation for the resurgence of ISIL, because those were the forces that defeated ISIL. And if you soften them and destroy their weaponry and kill a lot of their fighters, ISIL is just waiting there in the wings. Because you have noticed, gentlemen, that since this thing started, ISIL have not been, you're not hearing anything about ISIL nor Al Qaeda. They haven't issued a statement and they're not fighting. As I mentioned last week, the only thing ISIL did was claim responsibility for the bombing of that memorial in Iran that they had. And the Iranians came out and the Iranians connected it. So if Biden continues with this type of thing, with the American position about bombing those forces, then you're going to see a resurgence of ISIL. ISIL is going to reappear and launch their attack. Not against the Zionists, not against Israel, but against the Iraqi government, the Iraqi militias, and against the regime in Syria and so forth. That's what's going to happen.
The voice there of Gerald Peirera, leader of the Organization for the Victory of the People. And tonight we're talking foreign policy. We're talking about what's happening there in Gaza, the war on the people of Palestine. We started out by making some comments on the other war, that is the Russian Ukraine Western Europe / United States war, because make no mistake, the United States and Western Europe are part of that war. Let me bring in my co-host, Rohit Kanhai, for his first question for the evening. Rohit, over to you.
David, last week we discussed South Africa's role in bringing that charge against Israel. I would like us to look at India's role in relationship to what's going on in Gaza. There are reports of a lot of Indian workers going into Israel, thousands of them. You have India supporting Israel with economic and arms trade. They have a huge arms trade with Israel. And India also uses its relations with Israel to build an anti-Muslim policy. All these things has implications for Guyana, since we have a population that is divided on some of these issues. And I think South Africa stands out with its humanity, that India's role seems to be the very opposite. So we should examine that contradiction.
Donald, you'll go first, and then CY, and then Gerald.
Well, what Rohit is saying is definitely a concern. It's clearly a concern of Indian position has changed quite a lot from the time that Nehru headed the Indian state and took a very strong, founded with other leaders in Kuma and Tito and Suharto, the non-aligned movement, and took a strong anti-imperialist position. India's position has changed. The party in government in India has always had a very strong Hindu nationalism. And I think a lot of what you're seeing is reflected in some of their actions. If you remember, the beginning of this Israeli conflict, they abstained from the voting, or voted with the Americans at the first vote, and then the second vote they changed and so forth. There is definitely this administration in India definitely seems to have good relationship with India, and I think it has to do with the India-Pakistan issue, the Hindu-Muslim problems in that part of the world, which is extremely unfortunate, taking into consideration the reputation that India had as one of the leading anti-imperialist non-aligned forces in the world. And I would say that Jawaharlal Nehru was probably the first international third world leader, probably the first global leader that came out from the third world with the quality of leadership that he displayed um, up to 1964 when he led India.
See why?
Yeah, in addition to what Donald said, India also is a budding superpower. So we have to take that economic configuration into account because India's role in the global environment is going to be very significant, partly because they're seen as something as of a competitor to China, given the population base and given the stage of development that it's at. And I believe that we should be very careful because Modi is definitely has strong religious influences on him. I was hoping that the movement towards the BRICS might have been the lever or the leverage through which we'd be able to prize India away from the Western type of style that they want to impose on the New World Order. But I am not confident that it will be successful because India is also showing itself to be opportunistic. You know, if opportunities come for it to get big markets, it will seize it, or to open up itself to a new scale of industry based on the rejection of China, they will open themselves up to it. So I think we are faced with a serious problem here.
Gerald? You're muted. You're muted, Gerald.
Yes, the days of Nehru. Yes, Nehru took very solid positions, and even Indira Gandhi did in the underlying movement in support for the Palestinian struggle and so. But it's interesting that Brother Kanhai should raise that. It's really interesting because um, Modi is fascist. The BJP, if you look at the evolution, the political and ideological evolution of the BJP has a wing that is affiliated to it called the RSS. That is the wing that produced the man who assassinated Gandhi. And they had many of the leaders, the founders of that organization that existed before the BJP were created, had connections and sympathies for Nazi Germany. Chandra Bose went to Nazi Germany to enlist the support of Hitler in the struggle against the British. But Hitler put him on a submarine and they sent him and said, well, since India is near to Japan, Japan will help you in the struggle. And of course, you had the Japanese assisted Chandra Bose to create an army to see if they could fight alongside the Japanese.
Who was Chandra Bose?
Chandra Bose was an Indian nationalist.
Yeah,
fascists. And they actually created an army to fight to expel the British, but that was their line. But you know of David Duke, the white supremacist in
Louisiana.
Yes, that's right. David Duke wrote a book about his autobiography about his pilgrimage to India. And you will see that there is this woman called Savitri Devai, who was born Isabella Portia, that she went to India and spent years. And the neo-Nazis revere her, they refer to her as Hitler's priestess. So there's an ideology, there's a nexus of that strong bond between the fascism of the BJP and the neo-Nazi movement, because a lot of neo-Nazis draw the inspiration from some of the Hindu chauvinist ideas of this thing of rebuilding a great India. But Modi should have been indicted and charged for crimes against humanity, because when he was the minister of that state, he presided over when thousands of Muslims were killed, and Modi built a very strong a solid relations with Donald Trump when he was in office. And I agree with Professor Thomas. When you look at India's position, it's very up on the international scene. It's it's on principle and very opportunistic.
And the fact that they're poised to become a superpower,
yes,
makes the situation even more.
But
Donald, you wanted to say something?
Yeah. I wanted to say I don't agree with all of Gerald's position to describe India as being fascist and so forth.
No, I didn't say India. I didn't say India's fascist. I didn't say India.
Even the government.
not India.
I think they have some very strong reactionary position, but to call them fascists, I think is
no. I'm not saying India's fascist. I said the BJP.
No. Yeah, but
the BJP ideology is fascist ideology.
I think it's a little bit extreme. But what I would like to also point out it's a very complicated issue. It's not so as simple as as everything appears. But India is straddling. It's forced to straddle or try to straddle two horses at the same time. They have a big, long dispute with China on border issues. And Russia and China have forged a very, very close alliance. India is constantly worried about the border question with China. My own view is, I think there's some level of short-sightedness on both sides, because if India and China should resolve that problem and come to more cooperation, they can run the world, because the economies are powerful. And the population is big, the market is accepted and so forth. But that is the reality. And as Clive mentioned just now, the Americans are trying to use India as a counterbalance to China. Just before this war started, they were trying to come up with a scheme to counter the Belt and Road Initiative. So they would have had another route where we were transporting things and so forth. So I think that India is in it's not a position that they sit in either. That to balance their own interests, their own national security interests, and so on and so forth. It's forcing them also to do some dancing that sometimes can be very dangerous to the cause that we more or less believe in that way.
Gerald,
Donald, are you saying?
I'm going to come back to you, Rohit, after that.
Are you saying that the BJP is not fascist?
I wouldn't. I think that would be. I would say that they're very reactionary, but I wouldn't want to go to the extent because fascism is really very extreme, and they haven't done anything that drastic to give them that type of categorization.
No, but I know we can't get into this, but you see, one of the big mistakes a lot of Orthodox Marxists make, I'm not particularly is that this Comintern.
I don't mind.
You know when Palme wrote about
unrepentant.
Palme wrote about fascism. Fascism has evolved tremendously. I mean, you cannot say, you just can't dismiss Trump as just a reactionary. Yes, but Trump is fascistic. Nobody can deny that. It may not be fascism in its classical form as we knew it, Comintern type, but fascism has evolved tremendously. The BJP, this appeal to some mythical, some golden era when and a return to the great the reconstruction of Hinduvata, what they call it. It has all the ingredients of what constitute this big great willpower, the Nietzschean will to power to drive. The BJP is definitely fascist.
I think we all you all should agree to disagree there. Rohit, you want to
David, I strongly resist labeling Chandra Bose a fascist. No, he was a nationalist. He wasn't remotely a fascist.
Yes. Okay, we have some disagreement here tonight on labeling. But
Mr. Kanhai, you know Chandra Bose met with Hitler.
Yes, but Chandra Bose's position was very simply that the British chained India, and any party that assisted in breaking those chains, he preferred to take his chances with them. He just didn't
Well,
trust the
I
British.
think you should examine his writings. You should have a
Uh,
look at it.
in case you're just joining us, we are discussing international relations, and we are spending a lot of time on what's happening in the Middle East. But we have just talked about India's role, and obviously, once we talk about India, you get into India, China, India, Pakistan, etc., etc. Somebody is mentioning in the audience here that in Pakistan they are persecuting Imran Khan, and what does our panel think about that? We're not going to get there tonight because we don't have the time. Because I want us to come back to CARICOM. CARICOM has not taken a forthright position on what's happening in the Palestine, what's happening in Gaza. They haven't done so as CARICOM, and they haven't done so as individual countries, except for Belize, which cut ties with Israel. Um, I want us to talk a little bit about that. Yeah, why CARICOM on an issue which 20 or 30 years ago would have been quite straightforward for them? Why it's not that straightforward today? See why I start with you first this time, then come to uh, uh, Gerald, and then Mr. President Ramotar.
Well, I think there are two factors. First of all, there's the ideological shift to the right, regrettably. And secondly, there's a lot of tentativeness now about our political leadership. There's almost an acceptance of a Western best practice way of intervening in major international debates and events that we are seeking to follow. We're no longer trying to be innovative. I thought at one stage Musty was trying to go down that line to maybe offer very different modular appearance on issues involving development of small states. But she's backed away from it to some extent right now. So I think that those factors play an important part because basically that I think our leadership lacks self-confidence, and that might be because the populations they're not too sure of, and the middle class in the region is fickle and given to looking for any excuse to criticize rather than to offer constructive position forward. And in that environment, the politicians are extremely tentative. They don't want to exhibit robust leadership. They let all sorts of things that we treat as insults go past their heads without even commenting on them. So, in that type of environment, it's very difficult to expect robust leadership. So, to some extent, discussions like this play a role in bringing to their knowledge the fact that we're observing them in this particular way, and then we have to hope that they learn the lessons and maybe try to adopt a different approach towards these things. But that will require pressure because what I thought is important for the Caribbean is that we got about 14 votes all the time, every time. So in most encounters, we have a voice that is larger than the sum of its parts because most of them are just little dots and islands in the global world, not even appearing in the map as more than a dot. So we have an opportunity, therefore, to have a multiply effect on global issues that far exceed our weight in the global population, economy, political structures, and so forth. So I think that we need to exploit that. And that is why I raised the issue last week that I hope that this sort of discussion we're having would focus on the way in which we are going to use now the position that the Guyana is now in as a member of the Security Council to try to introduce best practice or to get them to think about these issues as they have to contend with the global situation that we faced with. The question that Wood asked has not been ever asked in West Guyana that I've been in a program. I know he raised it at political party level, but it's not been discussed at these public fora. And we need to be able to, I think, if we want to play a real constructive role, to get the parties to begin to think and operate in that way. I note, for example, two things that struck me. One is that the Northern Ireland, they're fighting to get the government restarted, as you probably all know. And I think it's about to restart, or might have restarted last week. And they're wanting to join with South Africa on the case.
Yeah.
We also have Nicaragua, who has recently also committed to trying to join and taking the case to the court. And I feel that efforts like this might play a more constructive role in trying to develop a sense of the Caribbean identity in the world. If we were to exhibit flexibility, power that we now seem to be accumulating, I think comes largely from the fact that we have oil, and as I keep saying, our petrol state can't be ignored. We can begin to exercise the influence that comes along with our increasing status. But we need to systematically exploit it, seek to exploit it. It can't happen by default.
See, why you made an observation, and I know you're generally very cautious on these matters, but you made an observation there that I think needs a little bit more discussion. And that is that Mia Motley appeared to have been charting a kind of alternative way for the Caribbean. In fact, it was quite refreshing. I think after, we came to the end of the Cold War and we had the introduction of these CEOs rather than real political leaders. And here she came on the scene. But as you observe, she has seemed to be backing away. It seemed to be backing down from that position. Any thoughts on what are the factors that might be at play in that backing down, if you will?
Well, I would say that she set about to back down.
That's why I say the factors that may have influenced.
Well, it could be maybe that she got tired.
Uh-huh.
Issues are quite daunting. Maybe her expectations grew far faster than her achievements because people were talking about her as a potential Secretary General of the UN. So these sorts of issues came up, and so I don't know, ambition sort of exceeded her real movement.
Mm-hmm.
She feel that she was flagging, but it is a significant turnaround from the sort of what I thought was boldish leadership she was trying to exhibit up to 2 years ago.
Yeah. Gerald?
Things like the
Sorry,
UBI.
I thought you would finish.
No, I would give an example, taking on things like the Buxton type proposal.
The UBI, Universal Basic
Income schemes. She was introducing that into Barbados.
Yeah. Gerald, can you come in and address CARICOM's attitude to the situation in the Middle East?
Dr. Thomas, I agree with him 100% with what he said there. There was a period when when the progressive forces in the Caribbean were very strong and we were mobilizing the people at the grassroots level and all of that. You don't see that now. And I think some of the leaders in CARICOM, the ones that we identify as the progressive, such as Mia Motley, Ralph Gonzalez, Gaston Brown, and I think the other one I think it's St. Kitts, Nevis. I see a sort of a retreat. You only look, apart from their position on Gaza, what's happening in Gaza, but not only Gaza. Look at the position in I think they actually, I think that pressure is being applied from Washington. I know former President Ramotar, you occupied that office, and you know what I'm talking about. The Americans, I said it last week, the Americans are bullies. The Americans actually call you. They tell you, they go up to diplomats and tell you how to vote. One diplomat told me that he was literally, when he put forward the issue of reparations and so at the World Conference Against Racism in South Africa, and the Americans walked out, he said American diplomats physically, literally physically assaulted him for bringing up the issue of reparations. So, I mean, if that, a diplomat told me that, a prominent diplomat. So I think a lot of pressure is being applied on those leaders, and it's coming from all quarter. And I think they're quietly adjusting. May started off, and I can see a backpedaling. And I did something about it where I called her out. I think that when they went to it was the meeting that was called when the CARICOM leaders went, and certain leaders were countries were excluded, right, including Cuba and I think it was the OAS meeting, right? Cuba, Nicaragua, and those countries. The CARICOM should have said, well, look, these countries, Cuba's part of Caribbean civilization, Cuba's part of us, the Cuban contribution to the liberation struggle in Africa and all of that. And they went along. They just went. I mean, you had others who actually, when Trump was there, Trump kept the Prime Minister of Jamaica and a few others waiting outside of his door. You could imagine Burnham and Eric Williams and Manley got any US president, got them sitting they're sitting outside the door waiting for an audience. No way. I mean, that is what we have become. That is the level of degeneration, man. It's sickening. It's absolutely sickening.
Donald Ramotar?
But I agree with Clive. I agree.
There are three things I think we should note. One, the tragedy of the collapse of the Soviet Union, because when the Soviet Union existed, it gave third world countries a bigger degree of freedom in taking some type of action, and that is why I think now CARICOM and should looking more and more to get a better relationship with BRICS countries. BRICS is probably going to be able to allow the Caribbean countries to have a greater degree of freedom in dealing with many of the actions that exist. And it is unfortunate, as Clive mentioned just now, that the unity that the CARICOM countries used to have on international issue, it has been eroded somewhat. They're not taking the joint position, and I think they need. I mean, I could have a lot of sympathy for the individual countries because I know what kind of pressure they can come under, and a small economies struggling to meet some of the basic needs of their own people. They are open to a lot of pressure, and I don't know how much they can stand it. And look at Cuba. I mean, look at the difficulty that Cuban people go through every day because of that blockade that they have there, and nobody wants to bring that onto their country, and they know what that means, and therefore unity is of paramount importance. Is to try to work to get back that type of unity, so that they can take position on a free conscience. For instance, what is happening in Palestine now. Forget ideology, forget anything else. I just talk about basic human values. That just talk about what is the destruction of life in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank is so horrendous, and the oppression is so terrible that I think it's a wound on our conscience, and I think on that basis alone, we should have been able to have joint position or better position. I know that some countries, including Guyana, they've made statements, but I also believe that we should have gone the route of Belize and break relations with them. That would be a much tangible, much more tangible show of solidarity with the Palestinian people in what they're going through at this moment. So I would say I have some understanding of some of the pressures they come under. I recognize that the balance of forces in the world has shifted quite a lot, but there the contours of a multipolar world is emerging with the BRICS countries, and I think CARICOM should try to link to diversify some of their relations and have more relations with the BRICS countries which I believe can give them a greater degree of freedom of action in the international arena.
Rohit, any thoughts on CARICOM's lack of action in relation to the matter there in the Middle East?
Well, you have to start with Grenada, the demise of the left in Grenada. I don't think the left has ever recovered from that. We moved from a bipolar world into a unipolar world with the collapse of the Soviet Union. Now we're moving into a multipolar world. That may give us some breathing space if we begin to form those ties. But Guyana is in a peculiar position now with their oil resources. That is basically American property as we speak. It's oil without the security issues that emanate from the Middle East. It's a high grade oil. So Guyana is cornered in that situation. I don't know how we can maneuver ourselves out of that sort of situation. So it constrains what we can do. And I think CARICOM until Guyana, maybe, as Dr. Clive is saying, we should reach out to the wider Caribbean in a broader development plan. And maybe as a region, we can develop the capacity to stand more united on our own and not be a puppet of any state.
Clive, Donald raised the question of BRICS, and that's something I know that you have explored and that you have very strong thoughts on. Can you give us some more insights on if we were to embrace or move towards the BRICS, how that would benefit Guyana and the CARICOM region?
I think we shouldn't attempt a movement without some study,
Mhm.
some exploration of the issues. It doesn't have to be an academic study. I mean a consultation like what we have now. So we build up the ideas and the issues that we trying to prioritize. But basically, I take the position this group seems to be taking that the multipolar world is more is keeping with the spirit of what we want to do going forward, what is sustainable for our development going forward, and what we believe also is sustainable for the broader humanity of the globe. So, from that premise, I think we should explore the possibility. I discussed it at least with all of you except maybe Jerry before in some limited way or the other. Um, so I believe in principle that has to be under serious consideration. I don't think it's enough to just join OPEC because OPEC, although it offers an opportunity to leverage our oil resources better, at the moment it contains too many constraints on production that might not be consistent with the time profile that we would want to have. I would certainly hope we have if we're going to exploit the oil windfall that we've got to ensure we eradicate poverty as fast as we can, which I think should be the number one priority. To make nobody in this country can stand up and say, I am monetarily poor by any definition that is acceptable in the world. We can achieve that by within another 2 or 3 years easily and comfortably. So, on that type of principle, I feel that we should there need to be some consultation. I have not discussed it further at the political level because, of course, it does not seem to be an urgent priority at this point in time politically. Although I know people are aware of how I feel about it, but I think the matter that we need to investigate.
Gerald, any thoughts on BRICS?
Well,
And
I I would like to endorse Professor Thomas. I think maybe we should try to have a national dialogue on that. But when you look at Guyana's position in relation to Gaza, you have Caroline Burkett Rodriguez saying one thing, and then the minister in the parliament saying something different. They don't seem, I'm not seeing any consistency here. At the same time, we have the Israelis are here setting up, working with DDL to set up a big dairy production together. We are saying one thing out there,
And
but we are
conviction.
cooperating with the genocideers. I mean, we have to be, I believe, gentlemen, my politics is not a politics based on Machiavelli's prince. It's my politics is spiritual and ethical. I believe that our politics must be a politics of meaning and transformation. It must be ethically and spiritually infused. You know, we just don't. I am not involved. I am not a person in struggle for the sake of getting power. I am fighting for truth and justice. I'm about righteousness. So I guess I'm different from the so-called pragmatists. But the thing is, we have to be principled. We can't be saying one thing at the United Nations. You're taking up a line at the UN that is reactionary. And then a member of parliament is standing up here saying something about we have to do something because genocide, it's too late. We can't wait for genocide to happen and all that. I don't know what's happening in here. You know, there is no other foreign policy. Is there a foreign policy? It seems to be all over. And we have the Zionists are in Guyana, right? You saw a letter that appeared where a number of people signed that letter calling on Guyana to break all ties, all economic, trade, and cultural activity with the racist apartheid state of Israel. And, the letter just fell on deaf ears. No organizations have not signed on in it, but the Israelis are here. The Israelis are working with DDL on some big project that they're setting up on the Linden Highway, some way up on some dairy project. So that's the latest.
I'm glad you brought that up.
Donald, any closing thoughts here?
No, I think I've expressed my views very clearly on the need for solidarity with them. I think you got to also be our best bet is to forge more unity within CARICOM, and not only our best bet, but CARICOM countries' best bet is to forge strong unity and where they can stand up and have 14 countries standing up and taking one position, let's say, on Israel, makes a very, very big difference. But in the world that we live in today, individual countries, separate countries, can come under enormous pressure, and it can do a lot of harm to the people. And I don't think outside of Cuba, I don't think that they got many of our countries. People are so ideologically developed or committed that could stand the kind of pressure that can very well come down on them in that regard. So I think we got to be sensible too in dealing with these things. But I strongly advocate that we should have had emergency meeting of CARICOM to talk about what's happening in the Gaza. We also have come out from a colonial past. We know a lot about oppression and suppression. This hemisphere had all kinds of oppression, slavery, otherwise, and so on. And I think we have a moral duty to stand up with the Palestinian people against what is actually taking place there now.
Rohit, your any thoughts as we close out?
The question of race relations in Guyana will color our view on what's going on in Gaza, but I think a lot of the issues, the issue of power, respect for each other, acknowledging that we have different interests, but we have to find commonality within that framework. There's a lot of issues in Gaza that, at a much deeper look rather than a superficial glance, are the issues of Guyana. And there's a talk in the US about the lesser of two evils, Democrat or Republican. We are faced with that question in Guyana. What do you do? Do you accept that one is the lesser of two evils, or do we dispense with the two evils and find a path forward? I think
Rohit Kanhai there bringing us
there's lessons
closer.
in all of this for us,
Yes.
and with CARICOM.
Bringing us closer to Guyana. I know some of you in the audience are saying that we should be talking about the teacher strike. I said tonight we are going to be dealing with international politics. We'll get back to the teacher strike tomorrow, and we'll continue to cover it. Of course, we've been doing so all week. I wish to thank my panel tonight, and I like the shape of this. I like where it is going. I think international relations, international politics are an important component. We are a petro state. We are part of a larger world. We cannot ignore it. I know, and I love you all in the audience. You all know that. And I know we get hooked on our local politics, but there's a linkage between what we're talking about and our local politics. I want to keep this panel together. They've been here 2 weeks in succession. With their permission, we're going to give them a break next week and then come back the following week. So twice per month, I think, is good enough for this panel and others who may wish to join it to talk about international politics. And international politics, of course, includes regional politics. Only a few weeks ago, we were talking about not a blade of grass and Venezuela and so on. And that has cooled down, and we have now got back into our local mode. And I understand that. The domestic politics is overpowering. But if Venezuela start behaving bad again tomorrow, which is not unlikely, we will get back into this mode. And we are not waiting until that time comes. We are going to dedicate part of our time here talking about what's happening on the world stage. And I know the impatience will dissipate somewhat, but we are not walking away from covering the strike. Professor Thomas.
Yes, sure.
Brother Peirera, Mr. President, Rohit Kanhai, my brother, I want to thank you all so much for coming through and bringing a new dimension to Politics 101, a new dimension to Politics 101, a new dimension to the evening discussion on these programs. And as I said, God's willing, in 2 weeks' time, I'll come knocking at your doors again for us to come back and talk about international politics. Of course, it doesn't look as if the situation in Gaza is going away anytime soon. So I rather suspect in 2 weeks' time, we'll be leading off with Gaza. But I want to thank you all very much. I want to thank you, President Ramotar, especially because, as you know, this program and similar programs have a reputation. And I know it's not a reputation that would lend itself to somebody like yourself coming on to this program. And so I want to personally and on behalf of the audience, thank you for coming on to this program and to help to, if you will, nail the lie that all we do, these social media influencers, is to throw red meat and engage in racism and all that kind of stuff, that we are serious people. At least this program is a serious program.
Sometimes you could be terrible, though, you know.
But I'll take that from you. I'll take that you because you're my friend. But thank you very much. Thank you very much for. I got my red meat nights, but not tonight.
I would just like to say before we go, I'd like to congratulate you, David, on this program on Politics 101. Keep it up. It's important. This is very important what you're doing. I want to also congratulate President Ramotar for being, over the years and up to today, very consistent in your anti-imperialist position. And Brother Clive,
Yes, sir.
congratulations, man. You was as sharp as 55 years ago. Brother Rohit, stay strong.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you all very much, my brothers. Thank you very much. Thank you
Thank you,
very
David.
much. And I want to thank you all in the audience for staying with us. I know it's not the normal kind of program, but I'm eternally grateful to you all. We have started the Politics 101 Bulletin, where we will have a kind of newsy section. So we have a journalist, a reporter who's working with us, and so like the show tonight, there is going to be a new story coming out of the show. It's called the Politics 101 Bulletin, and look out for it as it is posted on our website, on our Facebook pages. Politics 101 Bulletin, which is a new addition to our product that we are trying to develop here. There are some people who would not have the time to look at the program. And so when we do a report on the program, we give them a chance to read. Some people still believe in the written word. So it's a new addition, and we have started it this week, the Politics 101 Bulletin. Please look for it. And I want to thank those of you who continue to contribute to the program, so we are able to get some people to come in and to do some of that extra work. We didn't talk tonight about Ipadaji's donation, but I'm getting someone from Ipadaji to come on tomorrow night. And we are going to be discussing more at length. The teacher strike is on, and we continue our solidarity with the teachers, our solidarity with all the workers in Guyana as they strike for bread and justice. Bread and justice, made popular in the 1970s by Professor Clive Thomas. Bread and justice. Bread and justice. See you all tomorrow night. Love as always.